Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis Podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, WS_owned, for all you gamers out there, shares his background in classical music and performance and how it prepared him for some of the most competitive jobs in finance. In part 1 of 2, we learn about the accident that changed everything and the big break he got right after the great financial crisis to land his first job in finance in the back office. Listen to hear how he turned that opportunity into his first of many transitions to a front office role to become a Leveraged Finance Originations Analyst at a regional firm, eventually the same role at a bulge bracket bank, and really what that meant for his career. Enjoy. Okay, WS owned. Welcome to the Wall Street Oasis Podcast.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for having me.
So it'd be great if you could just give the listeners a short summary bio.
Yeah, sure. So I had a pretty unconventional background and a sort of entrance into finance. Started out as a musician, was trained at a conservatory. For most of my life, I was a musician. And, during the greater financial crisis, I unfortunately had first moved to New York City, and I was, concertizing, performing, and touring. Had broken my hand that year in about 2009. And so obviously in 2009 was the best time to break into finance. For a person with no background in internships or financial experience. And so that was a very interesting transition for me. Ever since I transitioned into finance, I started really in the back office, clawed my way over the years into a front office revenue generating role. And that's been a really rewarding process for me personally, because I really got to understand the business from sort of back office to front office, sort of all the wheels that it took to make a large financial institution run. And I think you have to have an appreciation for all the intricacies that people kind of pay attention to, because it really is important, right, when money is involved. So I was able to get a front row seat to understanding both back office to front office through back office. So since then, I've been, I spent about 10 years on the sell side and recently jumped to the buy side, investing in credit equities, event-driven situations. And it's been quite a journey.
Awesome. Let's start all the way back. So before we move on to the finance stuff, I mean, the background's super interesting. A musician, were your parents always like, hey, go be in finance? Or they were like, hey, we're going to support you and let you be a musician if you want, but then you broke your hand and then everything changed. What was like the family support? Was there anybody in finance or is everyone musicians?
Nobody in my family was anywhere remotely closely related to finance at all. Like, we didn't have any CEOs or managing directors or VPs in the family. Very humble beginnings. My mom grew up on a farm. My dad was, son of teachers, elementary school teachers. And I think the idea of finance actually didn't come into play until my mom, she was on a trip once in Europe, and she had come across a soothsayer, one of those fortune tellers. And I was with her, and we just did something for fun. We sat down and we asked the person to, tell our fortune, and the person essentially said, look, your son has a great future for success. I mean, he's a musician now. And we didn't tell this person that I was a musician. They just knew, which is weird. And then so as we went on, the person essentially told us that I was going to change careers at some point, and I would make a good addition to the business community, this was probably 15 years ago, I think, and on this trip. And I kind of walked away from that trip like, WTF, like, what does this person know, right? So, this guy's crazy at it. It's like, I want my money back. And lo and behold, in 2009, that's exactly what happened. And I think, the introduction was more by accident. It was accidental than purposeful, but life deals you a certain hand, and you just go along, you play with it. And so that's what I did.
So you're getting your master's, you're in performance, right? So you were actually like, were you actually doing concerts and all this stuff? And then what, an accident or something? What happened?
Yeah. So the way that
Yeah, I don't understand how it works. We don't understand the music industry here for performers.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it depends on the type of music that you ultimately focus in. But I grew up before YouTube was even a thing, and so before influencers and having your own channel was even a thing. So really, it was straight up hustling, and you talked and you called people, whether it's people that you meet at competitions where you're competing at, or after you played a concert in a city, there were managers or publicists or journalists that can make an introduction for you to somebody else. It was straight up hustle, and that's what you need to do. You need to manage your career 24/7. So the route is, I mean, there are many different routes to ultimately what you want and really what you want to do for yourself. Do you want to be in an orchestra? Do you want to be a soloist? Do you want to be a pop musician, or do you want to play classical or jazz? I mean, there are just so many different career tracks.
What did you want to do?
Personally, I loved classical. I have classical training, but I really love jazz as well. So I did that. I mean, as a musician, you start out absolutely poor, you end up absolutely poor also.
Yeah.
So you were trained to really take any and every gig that came along your way. And so I've played for bar mitzvahs, I played for weddings, and I played at places like Carnegie Hall. I played at, and on top of that, it's like you just take gigs, and
anything you can.
Yeah, anything you can. And so I played with a friend dueling pianos to pay for rent, I remember. And we were basically, we went in and we said, hey, look, we could do better than these guys, hire us, and we can bring in more people to the bar. And so, these are times that I think I could say a lot of the hustle that I learned was from my music days, and I took a lot of those lessons over to finance.
And so how long were you kind of doing that hustle where you were like surviving on what you were making in music?
Yeah. So, I mean, usually it could start as young as, when you're taking lessons. I mean, if you're competent and you're a good communicator, you can start teaching if you're a teenager, right? And
were you?
No, I wasn't. I mean, I was too kind of siloed in my own head, and I was so focused on, hey, I need to get as good as I can in this before I go to college and, before I go to competition. So I didn't have time for any of that. Yeah. I think where it really began was in college. Was, there would be these lull periods, these, off times where you're not playing concerts or you're not traveling for competitions, and you're kind of sitting around twiddling your thumbs and learning new repertoire. But you learn quickly that if you're living in New York City, there's a lot of people that really want musical lessons, and if you have a prestigious university or a conservatory on your resume, people will be very willing to pay you 50, 100, 150 bucks for per hour to teach them. And so and then once you start to build that network of people who like you as a teacher, then hopefully the word of mouth will start to spread, and they'll say, hey, look, right, like my kids.
Did it for you? Like, did you start doing that? So you got to New York, and then like you started building a network, and you were actually making decent money at some point?
Yeah, you can make some really decent money. I mean, I kind of did the math, and I was saying, look, if you're charging 100, 150 bucks an hour, you probably, to make a pretty decent living, to be able to afford New York City, you can probably have up to you would probably need about 20 to 25 students, maybe 30. But if you spread that out over, call it the majority of it over 5 days, and then maybe 1 or 2 students on the weekends, it's very manageable, right? And that still leaves you, 5 to 10 hours of practice time if you want to during the day.
And so what are you looking at there? Like it's 80 grand or something a year, something like that, 100?
Yeah, I mean, like back then when I was teaching, I mean, 80 grand was good, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, this is before I even discovered what people got paid in finance, right? But, I mean,
well, I mean,
that was an order of magnitude above.
Hey, well, I'm sure you had to take a pay cut when you went to work in finance. Was that accurate? Or so let's talk about, so then there was an accident. What happened?
Yeah, so it was an accident. It was more of like a recreational sport accident. I was going skiing, and it was just unfortunate. I've skied and in the past, but there was just this mogul that I didn't see. I fell. I had my helmet on, thank God, but I landed on my hand. And most people out there who are musicians, I mean, one thing that you should understand is that they are very, very careful with the money makers, right? So if you're an instrumentalist, if you're a vocalist, you're not smoking. I mean, I do know singers who smoke, but if you're a pianist or you're a violinist, then you're scared to death of hurting your hands or your fingers. People get those insured. And so, I mean, I broke my hand, and unfortunately that was at the time, a career-ending injury. And so I wasn't able to, sort of recover from that. I mean, I broke my hand before when I was a teenager, but that's when you're a teenager. Everything heals fine, right? But this was a different type of break. And so I didn't believe it at the time, but, I was kind of still practicing with the cast on as I did the first time. But, quickly realized that, this was not going to be something that I could kind of recover from.
Wow. Were you insured?
No, I was not insured. I did not have the money to pay for the premiums. That's how poor I was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're in New York living off of, it sounds like you were doing okay. You're doing fine.
Yeah.
If you hadn't broken your hand, so then what prompted everything, the shift? Is it like, okay, I can't do this for my life, for my career, so now I need to do something else?
Yeah. So at the time, it was 2009. The world was ending. Mm-hmm. And every single one of my friends who had been working in, call it investment banking, they were pretty junior at the time, right? So, think like maybe second or third year associates or second or third year analysts, or maybe first year associates.
Yeah.
Half of them got fired. And, that kind of prompted a very similar conversation that folks are having today post-COVID, is that, the world is ending. I had a really, really crappy lifestyle. I didn't live a life, and people basically wondered, hey, are you thinking about perhaps going into a different business? And so for me at the time, I was like, okay, I could see myself in sales. I get along with people. I like to talk. I understand process, and I like products. And if, essentially, I focused really on finance because I got an econ degree in college. And so I thought that was, quote unquote, the most seamless way to kind of integrate and go over. Little did I realize that nobody cared about where you went to school. Nobody cared about your GPA. Nobody cared about who you knew in 2009. It was like,
it was a bloodbath. Yeah, it was really bad. It was really bad. So, I mean, what's interesting is, so you knew all these kids in this bank because you went to a target school, just for the listeners to know.
Yep.
So like, it wasn't as if you didn't know what investment banking was. It was just, there was never a thought of, hey, I'm going to go do this. So you never had any internships in college. You had nothing on your resume that would say, except for the economics degree, that would say finance.
Correct. And
so how do you even start? What did you do? This is back in 2009. Like you said, the world's ending. Everyone's getting fired. You have no experience in finance. So how are you even approaching this kind of shift?
I mean, it's not the best answer because, I didn't have the benefit of Wall Street Oasis at the time. And
we were there. We were around, man. You didn't find it.
Yeah, you guys were around, and through the process, I found you guys. And, at the time, most of my friends were musicians. And unfortunately, it wasn't like I had a network of people that I could go and say, hey, like, what did you go through? What was your process? What did you have to do to get your foot in the door? And so for me, it was, I mean, for lack of a better way of explaining it, it was like a spray and pray type of approach, right? And, in retrospect, it wasn't the best way because, like, I could have used my time so much better, targeted my conversations and people a lot better. And so I think the one thing that I remember from the time was I had been going to all these job websites, and I don't think LinkedIn was as big back then either, but it was like all these like Glassdoor. I can't remember what the sites were, but I kept count. I tossed about 260 resumes to very different places, and I got no responses back in the 2 months that I had spent. And it was a combination of just my resume just didn't have anything that the headhunters were looking for. And my cover letters, nobody read. And I just didn't know anybody in the industry. And so what I really started to do and eventually figured out was, and I can talk to this more later, but it's networking. Like I cannot stress how absolutely important it is to meet the right people. And that's not to say that I'm not trying to bash on headhunters or HR by any means. They do a very critical job, but there are really good headhunters out there that do the right things. And if you talk to them and they spend the time to get to know who you are, they can then find the jobs that are most appropriate for you. But away from that, I think you need to talk to people who work in the business, who work at the companies that you want to be at, or work in positions that you ultimately want to be in, right? And so, I mean, I'll give you a number, and maybe I'm exaggerating here, but I would say upwards of 90% of all the jobs I've ever gotten in finance have been from referrals or from somebody that I've talked to.
Yeah, you don't even hear about most of the jobs are never posted.
No,
they're internally hired or friends of friends are brought in, so it's who you know.
Correct. The way it usually works is, the need for the analyst or the new hire is discussed internally. And before any job description is written, in fact, that's probably the last step of the process, is that the job description is written and it's posted. People internally ask, who do you know? Do you know anybody who would be good for this role? Do you know anybody smart, right? That's the first round of people that get pinged. And it helps to know folks who are in the business, who you've worked with on deals or, on opposite ends. And that word of mouth, that referral, it goes a very, very long way, right? Because it effectively catapults you to the front of the line. Yep. And you get to talk to management first. You get to set the expectations and the tone, right? And the quality of the analysts, right? Who they're hiring, like you get to dictate that as well. So, yeah, network. You got to go out and talk to people, right? It's uncomfortable for a lot of people. Luckily for me.
Did you feel uncomfortable since you didn't have, did you feel there was a little bit of like insecurity given the fact that you had no finance and it was music?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think by nature of being a performer in music, you're comfortable being on stage and in front of people.
Stress.
And yes, you're very comfortable with stress.
Were you popping like beta blockers during your performances ever?
So there was a period in my life where, for some reason, my hands started sweating a lot more when I was playing.
Yeah. And
that just makes it makes it harder to play, right? You slip off of notes, you slip off the string, whatever.
Yeah.
And then I had a friend who was telling me, "Oh, you should check this thing out, like beta blockers. I take it all the time." And I'm like, "Okay," I tried it and I played, and I literally was almost asleep through the entire performance. I couldn't feel anything. I didn't feel the drive. I didn't feel like my heart pumping. I was like, I can't do this. I need to feel like I'm on the edge, ready to fall over. Yeah. But where the magic of performing is that you have enough control that you're standing on the edge, but you're never ever in the danger of like falling over the edge.
Losing it. Yeah.
Losing it. You just have to keep the audience as captivated as you. And I think you can't really do that unless you're there with them, right? So,
I mean, interview is performance, right?
It is a marketing and selling of who you are, right? Because, in both situations, I can see a lot of similarities in that, in a performance, you're interpreting either your own music or somebody else's music, right? And you're trying to sell that and convince somebody in the audience of that. There's nothing different about me going into an interview and trying to convince somebody to hire me, right? These are my skills. This is what I do. This is what I'm good at. This is not what I'm not good at. And luckily I got that type of training. And, interviews itself never was they were never a problem for me. I think it was really just about standing on, getting on top of the soapbox and saying the right words and the right buzzwords and not sounding like an idiot. Mm-hmm. That took time, and you had to go through a couple of these and fall on your face a couple of times and then sort of learn what they want to hear and what you have to say. So I hate to say that it's a process, right?
So 2 months, you're kind of getting 0 responses. So you're realizing, okay, I actually have to know people, or there's no chance I'm throwing my resume into a black hole. I have a great GPA, great school, no bites.
Yeah.
And I think it's obvious why there were no bites. It's just like, it's like you're getting screened, like auto screened out, or,
Yeah.
a recruiter was like 2 seconds on your resume and throwing it.
Yeah. I mean, I think folks in the business understand that, like, you probably have been through situations where you're asked to screen resumes, right? Like in your first or second year, you know what the job entails. And so in one indiscriminate day, maybe somebody will pop by, one of the senior guys will be like, hey, we're looking for summer analysts, or we're looking for a new analyst to join, or interns. Here's a stack of resumes, take a look at it, right? And like these resumes are, there's like a pile of 200 and they'll dole out 50-50, right? Or, even ways across 4 people, and you have maybe half an hour to screen 50 resumes, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, you're lucky if anybody spends more than 20 seconds on your resume. And, at the time I just didn't know, because I have been, a musician, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll just put this, and this on there, and then look at everybody ignore me right, on the job application. So, but yeah, I would say how I ultimately ended up in getting traction was I was able to network and get in touch with somebody. I think I was at music festival at the time. I sent out a resume to a bank, and I'm not going to name it, but there were many banks that came under the purview of the SEC during the greater financial crisis, because of the amount of leverage and debt they put on. And so there was a team that was created internally across all these different banks to monitor, portfolios of bad assets, right? Bad credit cards, bad auto loans, bad student debt, whatever it is. It got grouped into a good co and bad co, right, for most of these banks. And so that was my foot in the door, right? There was somebody, the team was very small. I worked directly with the COO at the time.
But how did you even meet this person? At a music festival, just randomly?
No, it was weird, because my mom had basically talked to her son, and her son was applying for college. It was just a random conversation. I was there, and I was at the meeting.
Your mom or whose mom?
Yeah, my mom and I were at this like summer thing. It was
Okay.
it was like a picnic, call it a picnic or something. And the person was there with her son, and the person had worked at a major investment bank, and so we just got talking. My mom started talking to the kid because he was talking about colleges and where he wanted to apply, and she dragged me over. He's like, "Oh, my son just went through this, 4 years ago, 5 years ago." So, she willingly volunteered me for this, and then halfway through the conversation, we found out like the mom comes over, and then the mom's like, "Oh yeah, I work at one of the investment banks. We're actually looking to build out a team. We need somebody to help out." And that's where it started, and it wasn't through a job description. It wasn't through a posting on a job site. It was basically,
it's that connection. It's that personal connection.
That personal connection. They look at you, they see you, they shake your hand, they do that, like, elevator, like, hey, give me your elevator pitch. Like, why do you belong here? And it's so much easier than being a 2-dimensional package, right, that you submit to Headhunter, right, or HR department. Again, I'm not ripping on those guys, but they're dealing with an unbelievable amount of like names they have to screen on a daily basis, right? So
yeah. So really interesting. So you kind of, that was the change. That was the break. It was just, at some sort of picnic or event or whatever, just talking with random strangers.
Yep. And I would say, like, at the same time, having understood how this process worked, I would actually seek out people just to grab coffee, or I go to networking or recruiting events.
You were doing that
after this, right?
After this. Okay. You did you get the job right away, like within a few weeks?
No, it was a process, right? So it was a process that took over a month. And I would say, I went in for multiple rounds. I did some exercises, some brain teasers at the time. And, but this was in conjunction after I realized this was what actually got me my foot in the door, or actually got a conversation.
Even got an interview.
Yeah, got me that interview. This, I started to seek out people who worked in the business, right? Junior level folks, or.
How are you doing? And were you using LinkedIn? Was it even around then? Yeah, it's a little.
No, I don't recall LinkedIn ever
alum databases, stuff like that.
Yeah. Then I started tapping into the alum database. I started to ask friends, hey, I'm so-and-so, I broke my hand. You probably met me at a party in college, you know, and I'm looking for these opportunities. I really started broadening the net to talking to people. I straight up stopped dropping resumes at those job sites.
Yeah.
And over the course of call it like the next month and a half, as I was interviewing at this first firm, I got a lot of different interviews. Ultimately didn't work out because they were looking for very experienced people.
Yeah.
You have to understand in 2009, there was more supply than demand at the time. And so people were just looking for people who have previous experience and willing to work for half time. Oh yeah. And so that's who I was competing against. I showed up with a resume. I remember some guy, I was sitting in the interview and he looked at my resume for a good 15 seconds, didn't say anything. I'm just sitting there waiting for him to say something. So after he read it for 15 seconds, he looks at me and he's like, so why the F are you here? he's like, I look at your resume and there's nothing here that I could hire you for. Right. And so, there are many situations where.
What did you say?
I mean, so by this.
Try to save it?
Yeah. So it's all about the story, right? People in the business love a good story. And it's not that it's fake. It's just that you have to be able to tell a compelling story. For me, I told them about my success in music, what I was doing at the time. I was, briefly managed by a large musical management company. And I told them, look, I'm willing to give all these things up that I've worked for the last 20 years to come work for you guys. Right. Like, yeah, this was a life passion of mine, but looking at what you guys do, this is like something that I'm willing to just give up my life accomplishment for and start over and, explore with you guys. And so that was a story that I went with, not exactly in that, told in that exact way. It was better phrased than that, but you have to be able to show them and tell them that they're valued, you want to be part of their team, and that they're building something really cool. Right. So, in so many words. So it was a real education process for me. It was a real, a time for me to really start to exercise and to practice my speaking skills, because historically I had spoken with my instrument, right? I never had to get up and be like, oh, this is what I'm playing. This is how long I practice for. I hope you like it, don't boo me off the stage.
No, it's just like, hi, okay, here we go.
Yeah, now it's like, I have a, 8x11 piece of paper in front of me. I have to tell my life story in under 30 seconds and for them not to lose interest. So it was like a different skill that you have to learn, but ultimately it's just, you do it enough times, you know exactly what to say.
Yeah. And so you're kind of coming in, you ended up, I assume, not getting the job at that place where the guy was asking you, why are you here? But you ended up getting a back office, middle office role at the first place.
Yeah, it was a back office role. It was purely risk reporting. And it was during the time when the SEC was pretty much like on top of every single bank in terms of their risk levels, their collateral, their, they call them RWAs, risk-weighted assets, to cover all the bad loans that could potentially go sour. And my job at the time was basically trying to collect data points. I was the bad cop in the group, right? And so the group basically was risk management, and the analysts and the senior analysts were all modeling the company's, projections, what they could potentially perform. Are they going to bust covenants? Is there going to be a liquidity issue?
Yeah.
They're not focused on how big is the loan out to these guys, and then how much assets or risk-weighted assets do we have against those loans, right? And so my job was to collect from every single analyst for every single sector what the individual loans were. And so that involved a lot of large data dumps, a lot of kind of talking to people in terms of, these spreadsheets were like 2,000 rows long, right? And like gibberish and format that you just like, it would just make you dizzy, and like you would fall asleep going through this spreadsheet because it was so large.
Yeah.
And so my job at the time was to collect all this data, try to pivot table all that, put it into digestible form for senior management of the group.
You got really good at Excel really fast.
I got really good at Excel really fast.
Yeah.
Pivot tables, like modeling, like filtering, VLOOKUPs, like offset, everything. So I actually look back and I couldn't be more thankful for that experience. As much as it was such a bad fit for me, I learned Excel. I got my foot in the door. Somebody gave me a chance. Out of all those people that I talked to, this person gave me a chance. And this person was a really, really difficult person to work for. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was terrible. But I'm forever going to be in this person's debt for allowing me to get my foot through the door.
What are you working? What were you working back then? 80 hours a week? 100? 60?
It was like 70 hours. It was my first. Yeah, it was about 70 to 75 hours.
And you didn't stay for very long. This was a bulge bracket back office role, but you didn't stay for very long. So then what did you start looking right away, or within 5 months you're like, I can't handle this, or you're like, I don't want to be in the back office? What was the thought process?
Well, during that time, so I knew that I always wanted to invest. I always wanted to be close to the P&L, right? So throughout the course of being in this position, I realized that your pay and your performance is the highest, right, when it's closest to revenue generating roles. And at the time when I was working in my free time, I would go and I would network with people in leveraged finance. I would network with people who are in investment banking. And we would just really informally, we go out for drinks and people would just kind of shoot off like what they were getting paid. Right. And so, and like the extra opportunities that they were talking about.
What were you getting paid? You're like 50, 60, something like that?
It was like, I was getting paid 65,000.
Like almost no bonus, right? Almost no bonus.
Yeah, I was no bonus. I mean, you're back office. You're not generating. You're a cost center, right? Yeah. So like, you'd be lucky if you'd be lucky to keep your job.
Yeah.
Because I was getting paid 65. In 2009, I mean, it's gone up significantly. I think all analysts at this point get paid at least like probably 75, 80,000.
Yeah.
I know investment banks last year through COVID,
it was like 110 or something, or
yeah, 110. That's what I heard. And there was that whole the Goldman presentation that got leaked, which was destructive for.
Yeah, we're about to rerun our work-life balance survey that we ran and promoted based off of that, and it's going to be interesting. We'll see what this.
I love to see what the finished product is. I'm a little removed from like entry level economics, but it's good to be like, you know what, probably could have waited a couple of years before I started entry level. But yeah, no, well, I would say so. I was getting paid at like 65 grand, and all the other analysts were probably getting paid probably 16 to 25% more than I was, and I learned really quickly that the front office roles were left in banking, trading, sales, right? And, I knew I was going to be good at those roles because, creating pivot tables and looking at data dumps 24/7, that I realized very quickly that was not what I wanted to do. And I always knew that this was just going to be a first step of many steps that I needed to take to ultimately get to where I wanted to. Because I knew there was no way for me to bridge the music to a front office investment banking role, right? Like you have an army to recruit from all the top tier schools, from your second tier schools, right? You don't need somebody who's like 5 years out of college and like trying to do a career change in the worst financial crisis in the history of of the world. And so like for me, I knew that that's what I had to do. And so, under a year I spent there, I eventually was able to get, again, through network, through friends, a role at a leveraged finance shop. And unfortunately, this was another sort of stone that I needed to step in order to get to my ultimate role. The bank had been nationalized. There was no appetite for risk there. And it's funny because if you want to run or be in a leveraged finance group, you have to be able to take on risk or underwrite risky deals. We were having trouble going to credit committee for double B plus names, right? Like, leveraged finance, you would do triple C's. And at the time, 2009, nobody wanted to touch triple C's. And so it was extremely hard to take risks. So we were never left lead on any deal. I got very used to being on the right for writing indentures and, doing loan deals. But the process itself of pitching, putting together presentations, modeling, was just another tool I was adding to my belt. And I knew I had to be patient. I wasn't complaining. I just put my head down and just did my work there.
Yeah.
But it was hard. That was a really hard job. Like I remember one summer, I was like all the senior guys were on vacation, and then we got this deal that nobody on the street wanted. Like Bank of America had passed, like JP Morgan had passed. And these guys were like, please, like, do this deal for us. And so we got mandated left lead on this, but it was just me and this VP. And this VP was pretty new. I think that week in the 7 days, I probably slept 20 hours in 7 days, right? So this was, I was commuting to Connecticut at the time.
Oh my God.
And so my day for about a week and a half. And like by the end of this, I was like hallucinating. I like didn't realize what I was doing, but the commute itself is like 40 minutes, 50 minutes. And so I would get up at 5. I try to get on like the 6:45, 7 o'clock train, get to the office by like 7:40. And I would be there until like 2 a.m. And then you have to take another car or train back. You get home by 3, and then you're up in like 2 hours, right? So I did that for like, maybe 10 days, 10 to 14 days. And like by the end, I was just like, it was just me and him, right? I was doing all the work. So, but it wasn't like a sustainable lifestyle. And part of the reason why I left was not for that. It was really, we just weren't seeing enough deal flow. And I just wasn't getting the experience I wanted. I didn't care about the hours, but that I was young enough where I was like,
you could kind of handle it.
I can handle it. Like, I don't have any friends.
But you were hallucinating a little bit by the end of this.
I was hallucinating. I was talking to made up friends at the time. And, any friends that I had talked to, I basically just had lost touch with because you were working so many hours, right? Like, I'm sure a lot of people in the business understand. So, but yeah, I mean, kind of going back to my previous point is that I knew where I wanted to land and I knew what steps I had to take.
You knew you wanted to be at a hedge fund eventually?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a hedge fund. I mean, I knew in order to, in credit or equities, but I hadn't figured it out what product I wanted to be in or what asset I wanted to be in until later.
Yeah.
But I knew that, I had at this time been talking to a lot of recruiters. I have been talking to people about, is it possible to jump into the buy side? And everybody has told me, look, you need experience either as an intern on the buy side, or you need to have investment banking experience or this and that, something that was modeling intensive, something that was quantitative in nature. And I knew, okay, these are the boxes I needed to check off. These are the jobs that offer those skills. I'm going to spend time on it at the risk of seeming like I was bouncing from place to place. But I knew what I wanted for myself and like what home I wanted to be in ultimately. So it was early enough in my career where I thought, this is a risk that I'm willing to take because, I'm starting 5 years later than everybody else, right? And so I don't have the time and the years to spare. I need to
Meaning jumping again was a risk you were willing to take.
Yeah. Like I can't spend
2 years.
3 years at one, 2 years at one job and another 3 years at one job. I mean, like by the time you get to the buy side, you're 50 years old, and like if you wanted to put in like the proper 2 years, 3 years role to really absorb everything. And so I got absolutely what I was needed. And again, this may be the absolutely worst career advice. Don't take it. My situation is 100% different from most of the people on the street.
No, there's a lot of people that are at shops that aren't getting enough deal flow. So it's relevant.
Yeah, but I talk to people. I talk to folks all the time. I mean, a lot of friends of mine who are at either advisory firms or investment banks or hedge funds. They're not seeing deals. It's like the most common thing that I hear from my friends is, I just want to have something lined up, or I'm afraid of moving because I don't want to have a job. And like it is that uncertainty that comes along with not having a safety net or the security of a job. Mm-hmm. But most people, I find, talk themselves out of finding where they want to be at eventually because they're just comfortable and cushy where they are, even though they don't like it, right? And I think that's fine. I knew I was always more driven than that, and if I was bored, I would never put in the work where I was at. So I needed to feel driven and excited about my work, right? And so, so that's basically what I was wrestling with at the time.
And so you kind of are approaching that. This was like your second gig out of, you're doing the long commute, not crazy long, but you're doing a commute. You were in Lev Fin at that point, right?
Yep.
And then, so you're kind of already headed down that path with credit. but then tell me, like, what's the next thought process? You another person, that now this is your master networker, kind of tells you, hey, we have another analyst role, or what?
Yes. So the next job also was through a friend.
Another bulge bracket. Now went back to a bulge bracket bank.
Went to a bulge bracket. And so it was a friend that had worked with at my first job, the first position that I had been in.
There's the connection.
And and this person had basically left that previous job and networked himself into this group. And I hit him up and I asked him, hey, look, I'm looking for a role that has a quantitative / legal structuring background or perspective. And he said, look, I don't have that particular role, but if you want to get your foot in the door, this is the way to do it. And so we did a couple of interviews, a couple of conversations with people on the team. The subsequent role was actually one of the most helpful roles I've ever taken. And why I say that is because in the investing world, especially in credit, you have to understand legalese, right? And so in situations where you're in bankruptcy, or you're arguing over assets, or you're arguing about valuation and sort of the waterfall that ensues, it's really, really important to understand the legal parameters of the instrument that you live in, right? And so it's not enough to have to say, hey, look, I'm investing in the most senior part of the capital structure. There are busts, there are holes, there are documents that are Swiss cheese, right? And you need to be able to understand that document and understand where the traps are. And so my job in the subsequent role was structuring credit agreements and looking at indentures. And so it was a great front row seat to how leverage buyouts are structured. Right? These were, very large, well-known sponsors like TPG and Carlyle, Blackstone, and Bain Capital. And they were the 800-pound gorillas in the room, and they were able to dictate a lot of the terms in these credit agreements and a lot of these legalese. And the role was, the way I can describe this role is that you're a conductor, right? You're a conductor, like an orchestral conductor.
Yeah.
You're conducting internal credit approval. You're conducting the coverage teams or the left-fin groups, right? What they're willing to underwrite and sell to the market. You're conducting the structuring aspect of it, meaning you have to talk to your counsel, and then your counsel had to talk to the company's counsel, right? So you have to orchestrate that conversation. And then you also have to talk to the company and try to manage their expectations, because the things that they want and are asking for, they're not going to get all of them, right? So you have to, it's a delicate dance. So you're managing these gigantic egos of 5 different parties.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, not trying to blow up your own position, because you are, again, the bad cop here. You're telling people, no, the RP provisions cannot incorporate this. No, I cannot give you secure debt capacity that's going to over-lever this company beyond 10 times, right? You have to be able to keep that channel open internally and externally, and communicate very quickly, what is market terms? What is the bank willing to underwrite? And what can you tell the company and the coverage banker so that you don't destroy that relationship, right? And so it's very, very delicate. But what I took away from that is, look, I understand how banks extend their balance sheet, right? These are all the considerations into going into extending a revolver or a term loan or underwriting a bond. And this is the process that happens internally. And this is how I talk to capital markets, right? And it's just a really fun process. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it was not quantitative enough for me, right?
It was a lot of managing teams and
yes.
And you're a connector and almost like a negotiator.
Yeah.
And you were still structuring as well.
You were structuring, yeah.
But it wasn't quant enough for you.
Yeah, but you always ended up being the messenger people shot, right? You show up with something somebody didn't want to hear, or the terms are not as great as they wanted. I saw people asking for 7-year revolvers, and the market terms at the time were 5-year revolvers and, maintenance covenants here and there. But some people were asking, no, I don't want 5 years. I want 6 or 7 years, right? And then I want term loans with no covenants, covenant light, right? And this was post-Great Financial Crisis, when people were coming out and saying, never again will we have covenant light loans, right? And now everything's covenant light again.
Yeah.
10, 12 years later.
We didn't learn that much, huh?
We didn't learn that much, but it's just funny because it just keeps repeating itself. And people are like,
chasing yield, right?
Chasing yield, yeah, exactly. And chasing relationships. That's because no sponsor, no company wants to have prohibitive covenants. They want to go out and they want to make acquisitions. So they want massive, acquisition baskets. They want massive accordions here and there. And so, like at the time I was like, okay, this is really interesting. But, I spent 3 years there. Ultimately, again, my next role was also through networking. And this next role actually within the same bulge bracket firm, I was very aggressive in chasing. And so I had come across this book on investing written by this guy who actually was the head of the desk at the time. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, this guy works at the firm. He's only 10 floors below me. I'm going to go and basically bug the hell out of him until he hires me.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick at wallstreetoasis.com. Until next time.